Generally, I think the situation is that we have a breakdown crisis in terms of the minds of people in most parts of the world. What you're seeing is the effect, which is more or less inevitable, from the degeneration of the populations on both sides of the Atlantic. That's essentially, there's a moral degeneration, an inability to think, a lack of sense of responsibility, a total distrust among people generally. And this is a result of a long, multi-generational process of degeneration, which probably you can say, you can trace it from, in one case, from the assassination of a president, and then you get, from which point on we went down completely, morally and every other way. The United States has gone through a long process of degeneration since the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And that's the fact. And each generation has become, since that time, a degeneration. And that's a fact. The reason we're in the crisis we're in today is partly because of external factors, but it's also, to a very large degree, internal factors in the fact that each successive generation is less moral, less capable, less responsible than the next one. And that's what the fact is. And you see it manifested in many ways, where you see a destructive process within the generations themselves. And you can see it, in a sense, in this room. You have actually 3 generations more or less represented in this room right now. And the morality and the standards of conduct and the lack of truthfulness increases with each degeneration. The social sense of responsibility. Now we've come to a place where, in Europe, naturally because of the conditions overnight, I don't know what this report is from Germany. Our communication system was broken up and so forth, and I have no word from Germany. And we were going into, today, into the breaking point of one of the worst crises in the history of civilization, which is breaking out in Europe, but it's also deeply embedded here in the United States. If we were going to say that on morality, that could you count on the population? No, you cannot count on the populations which are dominating the planet today, especially in the transatlantic period. They're not moral. They've lost it. They weren't too good back in the time after Roosevelt's death. The death of Roosevelt very quickly marked a degeneration of the morals of the population. And it's been worse ever since. Most of you have no idea of what we ran into at the end of the war with the death of Roosevelt. We knew that his death was likely. This was generally understood. His health condition was terrible. Remember, he had a victim of a terrible disease, and that shortened his life expectancy. And we knew as he became weaker, more one down in the course of his career, each time you'd see him, in Russia or wherever else he would travel to, you see a man who is about to go under, who's clinging to life on the basis of a devotion to a mission, not because of any other factor. And we had this piece of shit called Truman came in. And with that shit coming in, the morality of the US population plummeted relative to what it had been while he was alive. We had a rebound in terms of General Eisenhower, but he was already, what had happened between that point, the time he got into office, there was a moral degeneration in the U.S. population. This was actually orchestrated, that the generation I saw coming back from Asia, back in the United States, was no longer as moral in any sense as what I had seen when it last left the United States. And it's been getting worse and worse and worse. The Kennedy assassination, the assassination of his brother, this piece of shit they dragged in as president, down, down, down. And my advantage in this process is that I have lived through this process. And because of circumstances of my life, I was pretty much aware of what, at least in general, as a younger person can be aware. And from reflections later, on reflections on what my childhood was from my standpoint as adolescence and later, the population of the United States has gone through, since the decline, the last period, since the last election of Franklin Roosevelt, has gone through a process of profound moral degeneration, and generations are known as degenerations. And the sad part about it is each of these generations that is a degeneration does not really believe that it is a degeneration. And that's what you've got to think about. That we're living through a succession since the assassination of Kennedy in particular, but also the anticipated death of Franklin Roosevelt. The time we went into Normandy successfully, the British dropped the mask, and they became the pigs they were. And that's what happened to us. So the question is then, what will it take to get the adult population of the United States? I tell you, the adolescent generation in the United States is almost a hopeless case. You look at what's happening to young people. I mean, really young, post-kindergarten. Who knows about what the kindergarten who they're killing today? But there's a moral degeneration in the population, and one wonders if it can be overcome. But the point is, you get a sense that the problem in these generations is they are confident that their generation is right. They're confident that what they represent is better than the previous generation. And that's wrong. Each generation successively is worse than the preceding one. And therefore, when you're trying to deal with the situation we have now, and it's now, it's this Saturday, and it will be this tomorrow, in which the entire civilization, especially the transatlantic region, is going to hell. And that generation has shown very little sign of commitment to changing that trend. That's what you've got to consider. It's going to take a real miracle to bring about even a survival of civilization now. And the problem lies not in the circumstances of life. It lies within the people themselves. It lies in the decadence manifest by the successive generations. Now, at my age, I have an advantage. I'm more conscious as a person than most people are because of circumstances of life, some internal, some otherwise. And I look around me, and I see less commitment to the future, this time, that time, over and over again. So Today, Europe is on the slide into hell. It was arranged that way. It was done by the British. That is the British influence, the British Empire. And that's what I'm fighting. We have some programs, however, among us in particular, which are in the right direction. Unfortunately, the support for that kind of thinking is not very strong. Other personal factors, so-called, other things like that, get in the way. And there's a process of demoralization. And I don't mean disappointment. I mean demoralization. And so there is grave doubt that civilization will survive the immediate months ahead. It's possible that it can survive, but you'll have to fight to make it happen. And you cannot trust yourself, because you will find in yourself as a loss of the ability to do, in terms of commitment, what previous generations were able to do. You can no longer take anything for granted, most of all yourself. This is the great time when you say, one thing I cannot trust is myself. Because the impulses which are built into the process of degeneration of successive generations. Take, for example, the case of music. Now, when, one of the first things that happened at the end of the war was it was actually 1950, but the process was already there. The Congress for Cultural Freedom. And you take the case of a gentleman who we've been talking about among some of us recently. And we realize that in the destruction of music and the way it occurred, the moral degeneration in the musical community, which took over with full force at the time that the war had ended. And you see what happened to Furtwängler. Now, when Furtwängler went under, that was a process of going under. As he went under in influence, as the younger generation came in, as the Congress for Cultural Freedom was embarked, the moral quality of the population of Europe went down, not in a fall, but in a decadence. The moral quality. Music, for example. Look at what you've got. What you say, musical tastes. Look at what the population out there, what their musical tastes are. They are immoral. These you can see in the terms of music alone. You can see the moral degeneration of the successive generations since the end of World War II. And people can't help themselves. They don't revolt against what they've been seeing happening to their generations of children in music alone. And that is a moral degeneration. And in every respect, the same thing. People cannot trust each other. They're less honest. They lie more freely. They lie more atrociously, one generation after the other. What this means that we have to treat among us, we have to treat this occasion of disaster. We have to recognize that the disaster lies within the generations that are dominating culture now. The two generations, the young ones who are still coming out of adolescence, and then one before them. These generations have lost a connection to reality in many respects, which some of them have as a dream. They remember good things, but they come to them not as a commitment, but as a dream of what the past might have been. And so therefore, the main thing you have to fight under these circumstances, remember this very day, this Saturday, is a point of collapse of civilization. This is not a new condition. This is not troubles. This is not difficulties. This is a collapse of civilization. What has happened in these recent weeks in Europe and in the United States, the acceptance of Obama, for example, even though there's a revolt against Obama in process, the very fact that this creature and his laws are allowed to exist marks a degeneration. And therefore, we've come to the time when you're going to have to find in yourselves. Remember, I'm about hit 90 years of age. You're going to find in yourself, and have to find in yourself, the ability not to give in to the impulses which are embedded within you. The enemy within is your most important and most dangerous enemy, because you will not be capable of responding in an effectively moral way when I'm gone. You think you will? No. Only if a kind of a miracle occurs and you give up all the cheap crap and devote yourself to the mission of saving society from total self-destruction. At least that's the case in the transatlantic region. If you have any other opinion, it's wrong. You are now living in hell. And so far it tends to control you. And the problem is, do you have the means within yourself to fight that within yourself which is causing you to destroy yourself? And it is not what you do as much as what you don't do that is crucial. That's where we are. This Saturday, civilization in Europe has officially ended. Today. And the things we should have done are often the things we have not done. And I'm getting older, and I worry about you. That's where we are because of this crazy development here in the weather system. I don't know what happened in Europe last night or today. The storm around here didn't help anything. But something terrible did happen. And we'll find out later today probably what that was. But you're looking at the end of civilization. And we can rescue civilization. But it's going to take a mighty effort to conquer the enemy within yourselves. And only if you are angry enough at that enemy within yourself is it likely you'll find the capability of saving civilization. We're right now, at least in the transatlantic region, we're living in the brink of hell.